I see much of the United States political and economic future depending on the Asia-Pacific, and that means robust engagement across the region, but that engagement needs to be strategic. And from my perspective, in the region, China is dominating, leaving partners there fearful that the United States will stand by as China exploits the lack of Western challenges to its aggressive posturing. It seems to me that instruments of national power, diplomacy, economic intelligence, and military are only useful when they are fully deployed. And while I've heard your comments and those of the administration, and the attempt to do your best, China is doing its worst. It's not playing the role that it could be playing with respect to North Korea, destabilizing influence. It's constructing artificial land masses and militarizing them. It's not just that they're trying to claim them, they are militarizing them, that threaten shipping lanes and international boundaries. It's conducting cyber attacks and cyber espionage against the United States, including the high-profile theft of the personal information of 21 million Americans, including maybe yours and mine. Some would call that an act of war. And on human rights, you yourself publicly noted at the UN Human Rights Council in March that the United States is, quote, alarmed by the ongoing crackdown on lawyers, religious adherents, civil society leaders, and by growing attempts to restrict internationally recognized freedoms, including the freedom of speech. And for that matter, China's consistent support for Russia against the United States and other Security Council members are important votes. So is it that China doesn't understand that their activities are escalating threats against our national interests? Or has China chosen to push our limits, believing that we won't impose consequences?
Senator, I think that in various areas, China increasingly, but not dispositively, understands that its actions potentially are having repercussions that are undermining its interests. So, as it acts in the South China Sea in a manner that is aggressive, and as you said very rightly, not only reclaiming pieces of land, but building on them, and then not only building on them, but militarizing them, they run the serious risk of alienating virtually everyone in the neighborhood and pushing those countries in the direction of the United States. That's not a good strategic proposition for China. Now, whether it fully absorbs that lesson and works in a much more cooperative fashion to resolve these disputes, that remains to be seen. With regard to North Korea, just to cite another example, we've said for a long time to the Chinese that if they would not join us in trying to effectively use the leverage that they have over North Korea to try to move the regime and Kim Jong-un on the very objectionable and unlawful conduct they're engaged in on the nuclear and missile programs, we would be compelled to take steps to further defend our partners and allies and ourselves. And while these steps would not be directed at China, they might well be things that China does not like. And indeed, that's exactly what we've done, including beginning formal consultations on the deployment of a THAAD missile defense system to Korea, to which China objects, to include increasing our presence and posture in the region. We now have in the Asia-Pacific region in general, overall, close to 60% of our entire Navy. We have our most sophisticated assets deployed in the region, F-22s, F-35s, P-8 Poseidons. And again, this is not directed at China, but to the extent that China is not using its influence in a positive way and the leverage that it has in a positive way, we're going to continue to take additional steps to defend ourselves. So I think China has to factor all of that in, but I would agree that the jury is still out.
So let me ask you this. So if their actions, as you say, are affecting their own interests, but they seem to be on a course that continues to affect their own interests in the negative, to take your view, then pushing countries within the region closer into association and commitment with the United States is one element, but the result of that is obviously those countries in and of themselves do not have the wherewithal to face the challenge that China presents economically and militarily. So the question is, for example, other than that, of course, we appreciate the relationship with countries in the region, long-standing in many cases, notwithstanding whatever China does on our own bilateral basis and multilateral basis. But what is it that you do about the continuing escalation in the South China Sea of China's reclaiming of territory, or claiming of territories and militarizing them? What is it that you do to stop the continuous march that they are on? Because right now, I view us as observers of what is going on, maybe as protesters of what is going on, but not much beyond that.
Senator, I think we are taking significant actions to uphold freedom of navigation, to uphold international law, and to encourage the peaceful resolution of disputes. First, we have worked together with virtually all of the countries in the region to establish those principles and to create a greater understanding of what the requirements are of international law. Second, as we've discussed, we have been engaging in freedom of navigation operations. Their number has increased. Is that,
There you go.
can you hear it? Sorry.
Hopefully it wasn't the Chinese interfering with your...
Their number has increased. We've engaged in joint patrols, most recently with the Philippines. We've been engaged in air patrols over some of the land features that China has been acting on. We've been working to build the maritime capacity of virtually all of the countries in the region. We have a significant program to build that capacity. It's focused intensely on the Philippines, Vietnam, and other countries that have expressed strong interest. At the same time, we've strengthened our treaty alliances with all of the countries with whom we have alliances, and we're working to engage other partners. So in all of this, we are both developing the capacity and asserting the principles of international law that we expect all of the countries in the region to adhere
Well,
to.
let me make two observations, Mr. Chairman, in closing. One is that some of us believe that we need a more robust engagement in this regard and a more robust response. And I would just simply say that part of our challenge, which I recognize, if we're going to be intellectually honest, is that with China as our banker, that's an increasing challenge, and we need to liberate ourselves from that in order to not have that as part of the equation going on here. And the second thing is I want to wave my saber early. I know you're not going to tell me what the 2016 TIP report is going to be like, but I will tell you this. I want to know the standards, the material steps that China needs to take to demonstrate the kind of significant progress that would need to raise its ranking, because I am concerned about what happened in the last TRIP report in general, and I would be extremely alarmed after listening to your comments at the UN Commission on Human Rights and others that all of a sudden China does well. Passing a law is not enough unless you have enforcement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.